Hey, Jason, how are you?
Doing fantastic. Good to be here, Grant.
All right. Well, I'm excited. I'm excited for a lot of reasons because I've never had a hypnotist on my show. And as much as I've been exposed to this work, I've actually gone through the work. I've worked with somebody before in the past. Um, I'm just really excited to just kind of understand how you go about your practice, what motivated you, your story, and all that kind of stuff. So, and you're the first person on the show to talk about hypnosis. So, man, I'm excited to have you on the show.
Awesome. Looking forward to it.
All right. So, before we get into that, always want to talk about one of my favorite topics, as mental toughness. So, when you think about the two words mental toughness, what does that mean to you?
And this might not be the direct route you'd expect me to go, but I go back to a moment that, as of now, is about 9 years ago. And talking about mental toughness, talking about athletes, this is a story where I'm laying on my back on a bed. We're on a vacation. We're off to visit some friends. They're getting married out in Canada. And we almost didn't make this trip because my daughter at the time of the story is 3 months old. And I had gone up to the hotel room to change her, give her a bottle. I'm about to meet up with everybody. And it turns into this moment where just unexpectedly, I'm holding her, burping the baby, and she just falls asleep. And that sort of half mouth open baby face is looking up at me, and she is just out.
Mm,
And in that moment, time completely stood still. My phone was out of reach. They knew I was going to be a little while up there, so there was no immediate hurry. Yet suddenly there was this massive rush of just every positive emotion of just love and calm and just connection. And I was just in that. And I took that as a quick moment there. And it probably was a lot shorter than what I remembered it to be. Yet in that moment, I kind of did a little bit of a physiological scan to kind of track what that feeling was and connect that to an action, which to this day, it's not even something big and extraneous. Just by kind of shifting my posture and dropping my breathing a little bit lower, I can bring back that same exact physiological, emotional state on demand.
mm,
So I bring this up as we kick off talking about mental toughness, because here's the place where there may be conflict. Here's the moment where there may be some sort of challenge inside of what we do. And consistently, like just like a tool, like a button that I can push like a machine, that little bit of that physiological adjustment to just adjust the shoulders, drop the core of my breathing down lower, and suddenly I'm in that state. So this ability to what we call anchor, the ability that on demand, we can call about a specific sensation, which, over the years, here's that feeling for excitement. Here's that feeling for compassion. Here's that feeling of all of our emotional intelligence range. And I look at the idea of mental toughness, of not just the mindset of I can handle whatever comes my way, but also that I can easily access any of these necessary emotions, whether it be excitement, whether it be compassion, whether it be just simply being present and listening to somebody. So that's what I see as being that need, because it always depends on what our current situation is, what's coming our way. And I see it more as that emotional flexibility more than anything else.
yeah, totally. I call it, and I love that you're bringing up breath, getting into your breath, being present. I call it bending.
Mhm.
A lot of times when we break, we lose our mental toughness or the ability to be mentally tough. And so the more that we can breathe and bend, then we can access those tools that you're talking about. And trust me, like when you said this, I'm like, I'm so happy that he said this, but the button, because when I'm working with my clients and my athletes, I always ask them, well, don't you wish you could just have a button and push, like when you're out of focus, get back into focus, or when you're out of, when you're not confident, how do you get back to your most confident self? Can you wish you had a button? And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, well, you can actually create one.
Yeah.
You can create that mental button, that emotional button. And also we're going to talk a little bit about creating that button and anchoring. So we're going to save that for the middle of the podcast, but I love that you touched on that. So let's get into what you do as a hypnotist. What motivated you to go down this path?
Oh, the standard route, right? That's what everyone does. I was at college and it was the welcome week, and someone came to my university where they do all these big events for all the students. And here was a person who was doing one of those comedy stage hypnosis shows. like a lot of people I'm sure out there have seen. And as I'm watching it, just something about that just grabbed my attention and just went, oh, that's cool. And began to look out to find like reading materials. How do I learn how to do that? And I did make a rather fortunate mistake, which was that most of the materials I was finding were not about the entertainment side. They were more the hypnotherapy side. And it was the split reality of this is not what I wanted, but this is fascinating. Keep reading. And it's probably because of that, the early days of my work as a hypnotist were for doing programs for schools, doing programs for corporate groups. And it was always from the mindset of what was their problem? What was the challenge that they were facing? And then how can we use this as a presentation now to illustrate that and create resolutions, which, you know, we drop the word hypnosis and people start to have some misconceptions and expectations. I describe it a little bit differently than others, which we can just simply go after the one word that people might attach to it, trance. And the word
Right.
trance may bring about this magical expectation, but let's really simplify this for everybody. Trance can be defined as that moment where the internal reality, the internal perceptions carry more meaning than the external reality. So the story that is going on inside of us kind of domineers the story that's going on externally. So let's say for your athletes, here's the person who's the most qualified one out there. They're really skilled at what they do. I worked with a power lifter years ago that in his own home gym could lift a substantial amount of weight. In competition, it was kind of the reverse of most people. Most people can, from the rush of adrenaline, can do a little bit more. He would
Right.
reverse back and couldn't lift the same amount of weight. He had every skill to do the thing, yet what was happening? The story inside of his mind would had to be simply interrupted and then rewritten over.
Yeah.
So there's an old catchphrase in this world of we're not necessarily changing the client, we're really dehypnotizing the ideas that they're holding on to and trading out one non-resourceful trance state for another. And you know, in that process of learning that, I began to do these programs for schools, for corporate groups, for athletic groups as well. And that's what kind of morphed into working with clients one-to-one. And then over the years, as I continued to grow out my business, the revelation was the same words and patterns I was using to help my clients turned out to be the same patterns that we use in business towards ethical influence and positive persuasion, moving people towards a common shared outcome. So to look at all that we do, we're always influencing, we're always persuading. We might as well do it effectively.
Absolutely. And, you know, it's really interesting because I've had multiple conversations about hypnosis. And especially when you're talking to people, typically on that front end, when you bring up the word, they're like, what? You want to do what? You know? And I ask people, I'm like, have you ever been hypnotized before? And like majority of the people say, no way. I would
Mhm.
never. And I'm like, actually, you're hypnotized every single day.
Yeah.
Like one being, which is very obvious, that cell phone. You're hypnotized. I mean, you are sucked in by that device. And music, trance. You talk about trance, like
Right.
we all universe. It's like,
Getting swept up into something is the best way to look at that.
yeah,
You could be driving in your car, you're thinking of everything other than driving your car, you still end up where you would like to go. You're watching a movie, you know it's fiction, and yet we still get swept up in the story. But reverse these examples and bring it back to a personal challenge. You're standing over the golf ball, and you know all you have to do is just swing it, and you can get it onto the green. If you get it hole in one from that position, fantastic. But at least if you get it closer, you can get it on the next shot. Yet if you're there, rather than thinking about the mechanics, now you're in your head playing the game, trying to catch up from the one that went in the water 3 holes ago,
right.
trying to catch up from the one that ended up in the woods. You're in your head thinking about the other people who were playing that day. Again, there's that disconnect. So it's really for these people that it's new to, the phrase is really that congratulations, you're already doing this. Let me just show you how to do it better.
Exactly. You know, it's funny when you bring up, when you're competing in any sport or you're competing in anything and you have a mistake and you haven't let go of it and you keep on trying to perform whatever you're performing and you still haven't let go of that. I call that creating an emotional bag of shit.
Yeah.
And that emotional bag of shit gets bigger and bigger and shittier and stinkier and smellier if you don't let go of it. Hopefully you can get the lesson from it so you can let go of it. But if you can't let go of it, man, it affects your breathing, your body language, your thoughts, your emotions, and it just makes you tense.
I shared a quote of a friend of mine before we jumped on here that Marie Mongan, who was the founder of the hypnobirthing program, she used to say that some of the happiest people you'd ever meet are completely out of their minds.
I love
And I
it.
love that as a mindset because instead of overthinking it and dwelling on the issue, instead we're in the moment, you know, open to, if I was back to the story with my daughter when she fell asleep on me that time, if I was in my head going, yeah, but these friends are getting in from the airport, we should probably go meet them in the lobby. And instead, I just chose that moment to disconnect from everything external, be there with her. And now here is that, like a piece of emotional vocabulary I can call upon anytime, anywhere.
Exactly. I love that. I love that. Now, I know you work with various types of performers. What's a typical situation that you have to deal with as far as a performer coming to you and saying like, hey, I have this thing that is affecting my performance? What's that? Is there a theme that you usually deal with? And then like, how do you go about kind of taking care of that?
Yeah, and I think there's a quick story to best set this up, that if I'm ever working with an athlete, my story begins with, before we begin, there's a quick story I feel the need to tell you, that when I was 5 years old, my parents put me on a soccer team.
Mm,
And I was so bad at soccer, my only goal was to kick the ball. Forget getting a goal, forget even what I later on learned what an assist was. If I kick the ball once, I was excited. So I was so bad at soccer. By the time I was 6 years old, I was taking piano lessons, which is helpful to realize
right.
that for someone, Grant, to be in front of you, for someone to even be in front of me, they're already, to some respect, world classes at what they do. That the person who suddenly buys the set of golf clubs and suddenly realizes, oh, I need to learn how to do this. If they're calling me on the first round of that, I'm probably not the person they should be reaching out to. Meanwhile, the same, that if the person's reaching out, and this is true, sadly, or to my respect, I'd say proud of this fact, they go, well, how often do you play? And I'm having to respond, well, my kids are right now 7 and 9 years old. And if we're playing putt-putt, I'm the one encouraging that we don't play for score and keep track of it, because they're beating me. So within all that we do, we don't have to necessarily be the expert on the specific thing. And this can be helpful to the coaches out there listening to this too. Everything comes down, in my opinion, to 4 questions. How do you feel now? How would you rather feel? What are those things you're doing now? What are those things you'd rather be doing? And by having that criteria, whether it's the professional athlete, whether it's the high school athlete, this all correlates to a lot of the work that I do with people who are entrepreneurs, business owners. I was on a call the other day with someone who's an artist that's kind of stalling out, where he's got every opportunity. And that's actually an industry in the specific niche that he's in that's up in the middle of a pandemic. People are
Right.
at home more and they want to bump up the quality of their living surroundings.
Right.
And it's that high performance category, whether it's the business owner, whether it's the athlete. I go back to those 4 core questions, that the mindset really ought to be not let's shine the spotlight metaphorically on their problem and go, what the heck is wrong with you? It's instead back to that soccer story. You would not be in front of me if you were not already world class at what you do. So this
Right.
needs to now take on a respect of what's great about you, and how do we harness that, and how do we now utilize that and turn it into that push button skill that you can have, rather than what's wrong and how are we going to fix that. If we identify with our clients or our audiences by their faults, that's unfortunately where we're all going to stay.
Totally. I love those 4 questions. And I don't want to get off track on this, because it's more or less just sometimes when you just ask a few questions, the right questions, it makes boom. You get down to the core of it, the kernel
Yeah.
of it, right?
Well,
Of
I mean,
this.
the best illustration is that in another part of what I do, I teach hypnosis certification courses actually for one of the major organizations now. I help co-train the program that turns other people into instructors that train the trainer. And this goes back to a story years ago of someone in a class. Now, this was more so about people learning the skills of hypnotherapy. That's the work smart hypnosis side of what I do. And every break, this one student goes, well, what about a person with ADD? Well, what if they have this medical condition? What if they bite their nails? And it became a bit of a running gag because my answer was always the same. Well, what's their goal?
Right.
When in doubt, ask, because they're going to give us every bit of that knowledge that we need by finding out what's working for you. How do we harness that? How do we copy and paste, click and drag? Let's appropriately plagiarize from you.
Right. Oh man, I love it. I love it. Now, obviously, we're going to talk a little bit more about the benefits of hypnosis, but um, has there been a bad experience? I mean, because I know when you're putting somebody through hypnosis, and there's all different kinds of hypnosis,
Mm-hmm.
but you're getting into a very vulnerable state. Someone's trusting you. But has there been a negative experience that you had to deal with as a practitioner going through something like this?
I think back to one specific example, which the side note to this would be that hypnosis is a tool. And unfortunately, there may be the occasional story of someone in the news who did something inappropriate.
Right.
If you look at that story, the hypnosis was never the factor, it was the individual. And to say it respectfully, the person who cuts your hair could be a sociopath. So good
Right.
luck next time. So it's not the tool itself. Hypnosis, by definition, well, first of all, your mind is active and alert. You're going to hear everything. You're going to remember everything. In fact, you're going to remember things even better. So I look at that hypnotic process as a bit of a more receptive, hyper learning state. So there's no moment of, where was I? What happened? Instead, we're heightening that awareness. And again, that metaphor of the spotlight, let's shine it now where it ought to go.
Mm.
The one story that comes to mind, though, is kind of a funny one. Now, she was actually in for weight loss. And it's where in the middle of the session, in the middle of the work, suddenly something emotional welled over her and she was crying. Now, I had to, in that moment, ride a little bit of a balance of having to question, because I live by the premise, work with the issue the person hired you to help you for. So rather than going, oh, this is the emotional trigger, that's why she's overweight, that could have been a wrong assumption. It might have been the correct assumption. To shortcut the story, it actually was the best assumption, because in that moment, I just said, and just take whatever that emotion is and just let that fade away. As you bring your attention to your breathing, notice a sense of calm coming back. The fact that you're now taking better care of yourself means you could be more resilient for moments like that in the future. So I didn't pause and, dig in the dirt of going, what was that? What was going on?
Right.
Which turned out to be the right choice, because the end of the session, I'll very indirectly, for obvious reasons, reference that she had a recognizable last name, which then was revealed that she was the sister of a very well-known comedian. And
Wow.
her sense of humor was much better, it turned out. Because in that moment, she goes, that was so weird. Like, what do you mean? She goes, well, in the middle of the session, I remembered where I was when my husband passed away. And the fact that he was in the ambulance, and for whatever reason, I couldn't ride along and I never got to say goodbye. And I don't know if you heard it, there was an ambulance that drove by outside and the memory came back to me. And in my head, I'm starting to now try to connect dots going, oh, and that's when the weight went on. And she pauses and she goes, this is her language, mind you. That's so weird, because I was fatter then than I am now. Huh. Anyway, this was so cool. I'm looking forward to next week. So
Oh, wow.
it's what I love about that is that suddenly it wasn't that it was this vulnerable, receptive state. She was aware of everything.
Yeah.
She had the full recollection of every memory. And just as you and I are talking, we're focused on each other, thoughts will come and go. So the mind, as a friend of mine says in her lovely British accent, the mind's always a bit of a chatterbox. So it's not the deletion of that conscious part of the mind. It's that sort of setting it off to the side, which without even me having to say it, we have this ability to create connections. As she goes, you know what, this became even more meaningful, that even though that story was like 10, 12 years ago, that came about after we had gone through a bit of a health kick together to get in better shape. Now, that's not what ended his life. And they said he probably lived longer because he had dropped more weight than I did. And as I think back, she goes, now I've got a better reason to take better care of myself.
Wow.
So it's from that, what could have been perceived as a deeply troubling situation suddenly became every bit of strength. I tend to say that everything is an asset. The most empowering word in our language could be the word because. Well, because of that memory, I'm going to take better care of myself now. When anyone else could have gone, well, because of that memory, oh, this is not the right time for me to deal with it.
Mm,
So it's about that perception. It's about that result we can take from that experience.
yeah. I love words. There's certain words that are just we all have different meanings to it, but words like because and be, like I love be. Just
Yeah.
be whatever and just be it, you know. And that's a whole different episode. We can talk about language. Um and those are great stories, man. Those are like what I'm getting is obviously hypnosis. There's so many things that can happen in that state, but it's creating a lot of mental and emotional space. So you have a better lens on either dealing with what you need to deal with, or maybe connecting some dots that happened years ago that will give you clarity.
And I tend to say too that the process, we can look at it as, and this is a lot of what I talk about these days, that we can look at it as a formal process, but there's also something happens as we step into a mindset of simply being hypnotic. I go to, I think Minority Report was the first movie where we saw the sort of three-dimensional graphics around somebody, and they're reaching up and they're moving things around in time and space, which we've now seen in like every Avengers movie. If you remember in Avatar, there was the big table with the whole island
Okay.
projected up with 3D renderings. And the scenes in the Avengers movie, specifically around Iron Man, of crafting the suit, throwing it over to the machine, into the computer, and then Jarvis builds it. And I look at that as the example of the phrase becomes, if only we could actually do that. And the truth is we can.
Yeah.
That in our minds, everything is this holographic memory, everything is this emotional intelligence ability. And rather than present this premise to ourselves that I can't, well, instead, well, what if I take that feeling that I had a lawyer I worked with years ago, which is very clearly your audience. I had a lawyer that I worked with years ago that suddenly was losing confidence in his closing arguments. Rock star lawyer, was doing great, but then suddenly something slipped. And again, the classic approach would be, where did this all go wrong? What's the problem? And instead, we focused more like an athlete on a peak performance mindset. And it came back to, we've all seen these YouTube videos. They were not of him, yet you know the story. There's 2 seconds left on the clock in the basketball game. They're down by 2 points. He's got the ball. He's the other end of the court. Might as well, right? Hurls the ball the entire way across the court. Swish, nothing but net. Wins the game. They're chanting his name, lifting him up on their shoulders. And by accessing that powerful emotional resource state, like you said, my phrasing of what you mentioned was, that experience where you feel good by accident? What if you could do that on purpose?
Oh, I
So
love
we
it.
were channeling that emotional memory and drawing that out. So now, as he was standing up to give the final presentation in the courtroom, he was accessing that same emotional memory. Again, copy and paste, click and drag.
Exactly. Now, as you were talking, this came up for me. I don't know why I've never thought about this. Maybe this might be obvious, but when we hear about being in a zone or flow
Mhm.
state, especially in athletics or performing anything, but in athletics, there's so many things that happens in that moment or moments where things are going so fast, you don't know what the hell is going on, but you're doing everything right. Everything is, loud or it's quiet. You don't hear anything. It's bright. It's foggy. But man, no matter what's happening, you are just doing everything right and you're
Yeah.
dominating. Is when you're in that state, is that a form of hypnosis?
We can look at so many different situations. And again, I tend to say there's doing hypnosis and there's living hypnotically, which is, I think, really what you're getting at there.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's where we could, we can talk science for a brief moment. Here's different research studies that were done where isolating parts of the brain and studies, and in the imagined state and in the hypnotic state, there were different scans. There's one specific test with positron emission tomography, that old thing,
Yeah.
where
Pretty much.
people were listening to music and then hypnotized and told as if they were listening to music, and the scans matched up between the real situation and the hypnotized state. There's scholar.google.com. We can find tens of thousands of peer-reviewed studies. So we're no longer in a category of, well, I don't know if I believe in that stuff. No, we've got the research to back it up now.
Yeah.
I mention that because to look at those types of flow states, I had an experience recently where suddenly I had a project that was launching, and it became a real performance enhancement moment of going, cool, we got to get a different programmer on this. We have a specific deadline. I need to get this person on the phone. It's now 3 a.m, which means I need someone international. I can befriend that person once again. And it was like this ringmaster experience. And the quick moment where I had warned my wife, I'm like, tonight might be a night that I don't sleep, but then it's done. And then it can just ride out. And it was in that moment at 4 a.m. that the phone lit up, that she's texting going, how's it all going? I was like, going fantastic. See you soon. Where we're in that mode. And I would say there's a mindset approach to that. Again, it's where I'm going to bend the word. I'm going to bend the word ever so slightly, that perhaps in that situation, we can say there's something hypnotic that's going on. But to go to the, research aspect of brainwave states and, the reticular activating cortex and all that other research stuff,
Right.
maybe not. But to say, how do we use it? This is my whole mindset towards working with intention. Let's get results on purpose rather than just by accident. That as I'm putting intention and focus to what I do, I can better predict the outcome. The same as the batter in the box, who knows I'm going to have my feet about this distance apart. My eyes are going to go here. I've worked with weightlifters over the years, one-to-one, and here's where they have a very specific ritual of how they're putting way too much weight that should be reasonable on their back in a barbell squat. Yet because they have a ritual of, I bounce the bar off my chest, I duck under it, I know exactly where it goes on my shoulders. I take that half breath in to kind of brace my core. I step back 1, 2, bounce the feet, and I know I'm in performance mode. Which again, is that a formal hypnotic state, or is it still a hypnotic sequence? Again, like coding.
Right.
I say, as long as it's working for you, keep it up.
Exactly.
Well, it's where I give you the correlation to this, is that sometimes in a lot of what I do, hosting a podcast called Hypnotic Language Hacks, which goes out to business people, I'm the first to call out, if you use this specific series of words, is that enough that on the other end of that equation, the other person is now going to say yes, simply because you use the sequencing of language. Here are the 7 steps that I say every video should have. And just because you did that, is that enough to get the sale? My best answer to that, maybe. Yet here's the reality though. People who turn on the camera, let's say it's the business owner or even the coach putting out a video for their students, they turn on the camera and they kind of waffle for a bit because they don't know what to say. We have to talk about Will Ferrell in Talladega Nights, The Ballad of Ricky Bobby. My cultural references are going to get even more oddly specific the more we chat.
I love it.
The opening scene, the race car driver is being interviewed by the TV station, and he's never been on camera before, going, where do I put my hands? By your sides. And like he puts his hands all up to his armpits. It's like this, which if you pull a screenshot for the video, make sure it's this one. So in that moment, they're just kind of guessing. This is why public speakers pace. When instead, if you're going into that moment and you have specificity, I am opening with this series of words because it satisfies this. I am doing this stretch before this gymnastic event because it satisfies that. Is that influencing the audience or is it influencing yourself? Which one of the two is it? The answer is a little bit of both.
Right.
So it's where there's this self-hypnotic quality to all that we do. And by doing so, then we're going to operate with more intention, more specificity. We're going to have better clarity. It's going to clear away the negative stuff that we're carrying around. And we're going to be performing to that more optimal ability as a result of that. So it's this correlation style effect that it's not just how we're influencing others. It's also about how are we influencing ourselves.
Big time. And again, as you were talking, this is great stuff because it's making me think about all the things that I do within my profession and and how much it is. There's so much hypnotic element to it. When we talk about mantras, so that we repeat often and often and often and often. And like for me, I say 3 things before I speak or before I get on a podcast, before I work with any kind of group. I always say, I get to do this. They want to hear me and tap into your joy. And that's for me. It's not for, it's for them too. So I can actually bring my energy and bring my confidence, but it's for me to get locked in. But I say it enough times that I'm believing all that stuff and I'm pushing all the stuff that could be negative, any anxiety or worry or fear or doubt. And I'm just locked in on all the stuff I can't control. But it's
Oh,
like,
Grant, let's level that up. You're not getting to, you're reminding yourself of things that are already true there.
right,
Yeah. Well,
exactly.
a mentor of mine at one point used to say, and this was for performance, he goes, if you're backstage thinking that no one's going to want this, it's not going to go well, and for this moment that I need someone to volunteer, no one's going to come up. If you're doing that, what is then your body language? What is your demeanor? What is everything going to then telegraph?
Exactly.
So this whole mindset of manifestation, we're getting into more practical concepts of it. When instead, if I'm operating, and part of what I do working with clients, so many people talk about, oh, but what if they're resistant? What if they're a resistant client?
Yeah.
And I go into every interaction, whether it's private consulting, whether it's speaking, whether it's going on a podcast, with this person is fascinated by what I do, which let me just call out one aspect of this as a hypnotist. That's pretty easy. This
Right.
person's fascinated by what I do. There are stories that are going to help their audience. And there's people out there that this might be that one specific message they needed to hear to create their own breakthrough and move forward in something.
Mm,
Which by having that as part of my internal dialogue, it's no longer, oh yeah, this is an opportunity to come on and talk about what I do. No, it's instead an ethical responsibility to tell the stories,
right.
ethical responsibility to share what I've discovered over the years. Because even for those in business out there, the mistake would be, yeah, but Grant works with people in coaching. I'm not where he is. I shouldn't do that. Well, your specific story may be the thing that's going to align with your specific audience. When Grant, you have your specific story, and that's what's bringing people to you and subscribing to this program.
Right.
So as we shift it back to that internal ethical must, that's where we now find ourselves naturally in that place of congruence, confidence, and clarity.
Totally. You're preaching the gospel there, man. I love it. I love it. Well,
So take
couple
that
more.
last 5 minutes and crop it and just listen to that in the morning, okay?
I know, right?
Oh yeah, do
Exactly. I'm locked in now.
that.
Well, before we sign off, there are just a few questions that I wanted to throw out to you. Now, I know we talked earlier, and I know I'm asking you a question there's a lot of process to it, and there's a lot of
Yeah.
things to anchoring. But maybe in a cliff note perspective, how would you explain what anchoring is, and creating that button that we were talking
Yeah.
about?
Which perfectly, let's go back to the first story that I told. My daughter was on me, fell asleep. I did a quick scan of my body to notice what my breathing was, what my posture was. And this is by no means a new concept to anybody out there in your audience. You hear a song on the radio, and
Right.
it reminds you of things you were going through when you first heard that song. You walk into a room and you smell something specific, and suddenly memories of foods or cleaning products or whatever it might be quickly come back to the mind. This concept of anchoring is simply associative memory. Dr. Pavlov fed his dogs, rang the bell, fed his dogs, rang the bell, fed his dogs, rang the bell. And eventually, he called that classical conditioning. We called that anchoring. So it's the ability, here's the slightly technical wording, to connect one sensory state of mind to another sensory state of mind. When I do this, this is what happens.
Right.
Simply becomes the formula, which we can start to do this organically, immediately, which is, let's begin. I always tend to say, start with the solution, start with the end in mind. And this is why I told the story about being a relatively crappy soccer player at 5 years old. Teenage years, baseball showed up. I was halfway decent at that, just to give myself some defense here. But it was where, when I caught myself in a productive mode, I do a lot of video for my business. And, oh, your videos look so smooth. Yeah, you only see the last take. Uh,
Right. I've
but
been
it's
there.
that hit home. But it's in that moment, as soon as I do it, and this is something I actually do, when I have completed the thing successfully that I wanted to do, mine is a very specific clap of my hands, to which now camera turns on, and I have conditioned that as a response. Camera turns on, there's the clap. I'm in that presenting to the camera lens mode. So anyone out there in your audience can start to do this immediately. Start by, again, plagiarize from yourself, copy and paste. This is all about modeling that excellent ability that you clearly have. Otherwise, you wouldn't be listening to something of this nature. So recognize when you are being effective. When you are being effective, do anything sensory verifiable. The key to this is let it be specific. Mine isn't just any clap of the hands. I know the exact posture and gesture of it. The story of it wasn't that I just slowed my breathing. No, my shoulders kind of sank and the core of my breathing, I brought it down lower. So that ability to bring specificity, think of it again, like you said, like a button. When I fire off this computer sequence, here's something that happens. But take note, all of these examples have been about utilizing what's already good and positive. The fact that you know you want to improve in this aspect of your personal life, your sport, your business, whatever it is, means that there's already aspects of you that are world class. So
Right.
again, the more prominent mindset is that of harnessing what's already there, bring the specificity into it. So I tend to say to people, it can be a word, it could be a gesture. I do a lot of work with public speakers, and that's where sometimes it is that little bit of a shift in posture and they are in that mode. And it's not because we've done it once, it's because they've learned how to do it themselves to condition that, as I talk to people in business, it's not just the words and the phrases and here's the sales letter formula, or here's the mindset of here are the steps towards a high ticket sale on a phone call. It has to go back to that emotional intelligence, that state management, which, as you gave the buzzword for it, anchoring, about using something to reliably choose our state of mind, go into the right emotion. And the truth is, we may have other things going on in our lives. We're chatting in the midst of a global pandemic where there's a lot of other things going on in the world right now.
Right.
And it's that ability to not necessarily delete away what's there, but to set that aside for later. The same as we have that moment when we're in bed and we're thinking of everything else we ought to be doing the next day, to learn how to set that thought off to the next day, because 2 a.m, not the right time.
Exactly.
So
And
find what's great about you, utilize it, harness it, put it into use. There's your
totally.
formula.
Totally. I was doing that last night, and I usually don't do that for whatever reason. A lot of stuff going on today, and I'm like, can't do anything about it right now.
It was
So
excitement. It was
yeah,
excitement.
I'm just gonna go to bed. So that's great, man. Now, when you talk about anchoring, for it to be effective, right? Because you can anchor something and we can identify that word or that process, but it's about repping it out, right? And the more you rep it out.
Yes, and one other aspect to it.
Okay.
Which my only intro into this is to defend the fact that it took 3 movies of Star Wars for Luke to figure out he had the Force. Meanwhile, in the world of Mel Brooks, it only took 1 movie of Spaceballs for Lone Star to realize he already had the Schwartz. The ring came from a Cracker Jack box. Again, more specific the longer we chat. So this is a thing I've now nicknamed the Schwartz Principle. Thank you, Mel Brooks, because here's the simple 2-step formula to it. You mentioned repetition. Yes, that is a factor. However, part 1, the more you make use of something, the better it works for you.
Right.
Part 2, the better it works for you, the less you're going to need it as a technique.
Got it.
So to look at that sort of training phase, the same as here's the athlete who's having to learn exactly where to put their feet. I'm working with a strength coach at one point, and he says, okay, put your feet shoulder width apart. Followed up by, have you ever looked at your shoulders in a mirror? That is way off, which probably was a more polite way to say that, perhaps out there. When instead, now that I've conditioned that, okay, this is the distance my feet ought to be, I'm not having to think through the technique anymore. So look at everything through that sort of Schwartz Principle mindset, which, having talked about this enough, a student of mine tracked down balloons from the world premiere of the Spaceballs movies. Spaceballs, the balloons.
Wow.
They're 30-year-old latex. He said, don't blow them up. But the more you do something, the better it's going to work for you.
Right.
But then again, the correlation becomes the better it works for you, the less you're going to need it.
Exactly.
The same as, here's someone who's looking to, maybe have more people out there as clients as a coach. And here's the formula I'm going to go through in my messaging. And we're kind of muscling our way through it the first time, when the next time we turn the camera on, we start speaking. We open up the Word document, we start writing. So everything becomes more natural through that repetition, where eventually the formulas fall away. But the frameworks at the beginning give us that freedom.
Yeah. It just becomes a best practice. It just becomes what you do. I love it.
Absolutely.
I love it. One more question, and then we'll get into closing out here. I love this question because it's about reflection. And this is where I think where we learn and how we develop our craft and just develop overall. So when you think about just reflecting your whole career, what do you think you've learned the most about yourself?
I would say, and I say this, and the disclaimer is this is never from a place of arrogance. When I look at things that I've done, when I look at people who I've been around who have had really cool breakthroughs and created really outstanding results, I think there's something to be said, and it's somewhere between giving yourself permission to become really good at something, but also at the same time having that opportunity to call out, hey, this one thing, I'm really good at that. So we're a culture that oftentimes that's kind of put down, which, not to let it get to a place of arrogance or,
Right.
sort of boastful pride. That's where it gets dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
I said one time in a keynote at a conference that you should listen to your feedback, listen to your criticisms, but also at the same time, take some time to go back and reread your testimonials. That I tend to see that it's that ownership of going, I'm really good at that. And to call that out, but at the same time, being open to suggestion, being open to the flexibility of it, that what that skill is can begin to morph over time and refine and get better. You might know this reference better than I do. It was a basketball player who they were asking about the fact that he'd been a pro for like 10 or 15 years. And his response was, he goes, well, here's what's interesting. I'm not as fast as I used to be. I'm not as strong as I used to be. And based on my current skill, I would not get drafted today. However, I'm playing with much greater specificity, even though I'm a little slower out there. And I love that as a premise, that we can get better at something. Yet I meet too many people who shy away from that appropriate reaching back and patting themselves on the back to go, hey, because I'm good at this.
Exactly.
And to take ownership of that and to recognize that's all right. You're allowed to do that.
Exactly. And there's a lot of wisdom in that, right? I mean, that's probably what made this person, this athlete, good, even when he's slowing down, the body, the gravity, is settling in.
Mm-hmm.
But it's him because he reflected from year to year and got the wisdom from his learnings.
It's kind of running that 80-20 thing over and over, that we're getting the biggest results from sometimes the smallest of things. And as we continue to grow at something, it's now getting away from, all these extra things around it. I had a weightlifter one time who goes, I was so caught up in the right dosage of all these different supplements and things that were, legal and appropriate. But finally, I realized that I just needed to focus back on my form and the consistency. That was going to give me a better result over time, rather than it was the 8 milligrams of creatine rather than 5 or whatever the numbers were.
There's some power to just keeping it simple, right?
Oh, yeah.
Well, how can my listeners learn more about your business, your podcast, your books, everything, and follow you on social media?
Yeah, easiest thing to do is to start over at my website. It's jasonlinett.com, which, don't worry too much about the spelling. I own all of the wrong misspellings. They all point at the right place. Easiest thing to access right away, though, would be the podcast that I do, Hypnotic Language Hacks. That goes out every Wednesday. And while the majority of that is about languaging in terms of business, I know a lot of your audience may be coaches themselves or people who are looking to help more people. We're always influencing. We're always persuading. We might as well do it effectively. So the Hypnotic Language Hacks podcast, everywhere you can find podcast. We go out on video as well. And then to look at, go over to Amazon, Work Smart Business is the book I put out in January of 2019. So those would be the best places to track me down. And over at jasonlinett.com, for those who want even more on the business writing and business strategy, you can find there's a free webinar that introduces my program, Business Influence Systems, to you over there too.
Awesome.
Grant, this has been awesome. Thanks for having me on here.
Man, this has been great. This is, thank you for your energy and your thoughts and your expertise. I know I learned a lot. I revisited some things, but I also learned a lot. So this was great, man. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
All right. Cool.
Boom.
That was great.
Awesome.
It's so hard at the very end to tell my guests when I'm going to release it, because I do so many of these.
Yeah.
I would say if I can get it out within the next month.
Oh yeah.
That would be my goal.
Mm-hmm.
If I can get it sooner, obviously you'll know, but
yeah.
But if I don't, just be patient with me, but I will, I'll send you the podcast ad and I'll send you the link and all that
cool.
Good stuff.
Yeah. And we'll share that on my stuff too.
Beautiful.
Awesome.
All right, man. That was great.
I've learned the hard way that when it comes that final 2 minutes when they go, where can people find you? As soon as you've done that, toss it back to the host. And I've had people over the years go, thank you for that.
Yes.
Because otherwise the danger is that, I always tend to say, find 3 things to point them at, no more.
Yeah. Because when you're doing like IG and Twitter and LinkedIn and Facebook and YouTube, and then you go to your website, and then you go to Amazon, then
Right.
it's all convoluted. I had one guy on my what was his name? I can see his face, but he was just like, you can just go to the mothership and just go to my website and everything's there. And I was like, hey, that's pretty easy.
Mm-hmm. I got a near standing ovation when I spoke at a marketing convention for the line of jasonlinett.com. Don't worry about the misspellings. I have all of them all. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. I like that one. That was a good one.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, I think, again, this was great. Can't wait to release this. And if there's anything I can do for your business, man, let me know. This is,
absolutely.
I think we're both in service. So if we can help each other in any way, I'm here.
Cool. Awesome. Let me let you run because I got a meeting in about 5 minutes.
All right.
Awesome.
Have a good one.
Thanks again.
Okay. Bye.
Yeah.